This program is made possible by listeners who choose to support Frontlines and Backrooms. You can join our community of supporters through the link in episode description. Thank you.
From Lisbon, Frontlines and Backrooms podcast. Your host, Vladimir Bobatyk.
Welcome to Frontlines and Backrooms podcast. Joseph Cirincione is a national security analyst and one of the leading voices on a nuclear weapons policy, with over 4 decades of experience in Washington. In this conversation, he walks us through how close we are to a nuclear strike on Iran, why the United States decided to go to the war despite the fact that the deal was on the table, and how a US president could authorize a strike that reaches its target in under 30 minutes. He is the author of several books on nuclear security, including Nuclear Nightmares and The Bomb Scare, and has advised multiple US presidential campaigns. He served as a president of Ploughshares Fund, held senior roles at the Carnegie Endowment and the Center for American Progress, and worked for nearly a decade as a congressional investigator on defense and national security. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He taught at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service for 12 years. He appears frequently on television, radio, and in other media. And today, he is with us. Mr. Cirincione, welcome to Frontlines and Backrooms.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
When we are preparing this type of interview, the last thing we do is the final list of questions, and then the news happens. One news item that, in my opinion, was not breaking enough in the last 4 days is the resignation of the UN official Mr. Mohammed Safa. He left his post claiming the United Nations is internally preparing for possible nuclear weapon use in Iran. As someone who spent decades preventing this exact scenario, does this signal that we have moved beyond conventional deterrence?
Not yet, but it could be coming. And here's why I say that. One of the strategic objectives of the United States in attacking Iran was to prevent Iran from getting close to a nuclear weapon, or as Trump said, from getting a nuclear weapon. There was a false claim that Iran is 2 weeks away from getting such a weapon. That's not true. I think the president is confusing how long it would take Iran to get the material for a bomb with building an actual bomb. U.S. intelligence has long estimated that it would take Iran perhaps a year to construct a device, but it's true that using their supply of highly enriched uranium gas, enriched further by feeding it through a couple of hundred centrifuges that they have, they could make the material for a bomb in about 2 weeks. That's the hardest step in making a bomb, but it's just the beginning. So if you're the United States or Israel, you want to get that material. You want to prevent that. We believe the 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium is buried deep underground at Isfahan. The head of the Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Mariano Grossi, has said that he thinks that maybe half of it has been moved to tunnels under the facility at Natanz, under what we call Pickaxe Mountain, a granite mountain, where it might be even more difficult to get out. The United States has tried bombing these facilities, and even our most powerful conventional bombs, our 2,000-pound bombs, our 5,000-pound bombs, our 13,000-pound bombs, cannot penetrate that far underground. So if you're Donald Trump, you face the prospect of losing the Iran war, of not overthrowing the regime, not being able to open the Straits of Hormuz, not getting Iran to agree to any of your demands. And you have to leave, and you also leave them with this highly enriched uranium. That would tempt a leader to try a more dramatic approach. We do have bombs that could reach that material. They're nuclear bombs. They're atomic bombs. And we already have deployed them. For the last decade or so, there's been an upsurge in interest in America's nuclear policy planners to build more usable nuclear weapons. The argument has been that our bombs are so big that we're self-deterred from using them. We have weapons that are, 20 times the size of Hiroshima, 40 times, 50 times. These are very large bombs. You use one of these, the casualties, the damage would be enormous. But we now have developed or redeployed smaller size bombs, and we have these in basically three configurations. We have an airdrop bomb called the B-12 that could be delivered by a fighter plane, an F-35, an F-16, an F-15, or a B-2 bomber. And that has a yield, it's what they call a dial yield, and it can go from about zero point 0.5 kilotons to up to 50 kilotons. By comparison, the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons, 15,000 tons of explosive force. A big bomb enough to destroy a city, but small by today's standards. But you could have a bomb that could be, a fraction of that. We also have cruise missiles carried by our B-2 bombers, which have a similar dial yield option. It could be 1, 2, or up to 50 kilotons, depending on how you configure the device. More ominously, we have now on each of our Trident submarines, and we deploy 14 Trident submarines, which each have, about 20 long-range ballistic missiles in them. Those long-range ballistic missiles are armed with very large warheads. That's the 450 kiloton warheads. But as of 2020, we started putting in 2019, we started putting in each 2 missiles which had much smaller bombs, atomic bombs, not H bombs, not thermonuclear devices, but atomic bomb with a yield of about 8 kilotons. It's called the W-76-2. That's the warhead. Well, you could launch that missile from pretty much anywhere in the world, from the Pacific, from the Arabian Sea, from the Mediterranean. You could launch that from anywhere and have high confidence that it could hit with pinpoint accuracy on Isfahan or Natanz or both. And 8 kilotons would be enough to dig a crater deep enough to destroy that material. So yes, there is a nuclear solution to this problem. And I was unaware of this UN official's resignation, but I'm not surprised by it because I believe the U.S. is considering this. It is one of the plans that is being presented to Donald Trump as his options. It's a feasible option. He could do this, and he wouldn't need to discuss this with anyone. He doesn't need to go to Congress. He doesn't need to have a public announcement of it. He doesn't even need the approval of anybody in the government. These weapons exist. Plans for using them exist. He just has to tell the military what the target is, and they could execute that option in a matter of minutes. They could launch the weapons in a matter of minutes from his order. It would take them less than 30 minutes to reach their target. And we would have a nuclear event for the first time since 1945.
There is one thing that is confusing me. You mentioned 2 out of 3 facilities in Iran, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. In June last year, President Trump said, and I'm quoting, completely and totally obliterated those facilities. Now his administration is demanding that Iran dismantle these 3 facilities by itself in the 15-point ultimatum. Which is it? Was the program destroyed, or does it still need to be dismantled in any way with a bomb or by the Iranians themselves?
Right. Of course it wasn't obliterated. I mean, that was a lie when he told it. It simply wasn't true. And everybody knew it. The head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, it had an instant assessment about a week after the June bombardment, saying that the substantial damage was done to the facilities, but they estimated that Iran could rebuild those facilities in about 6 months. That was the assessment of many, many experts around the world who studied the situation. There's no question we caused severe damage to these facilities, particularly Isfahan, which I visited many years ago, which is largely an above-ground facility. And even the deeply buried targets at Fordow. Fordow was facility they built about 10 years ago, deep underground, 15 years ago, deep underground. But we did a remarkable maneuver. We fired bombs down the ventilation shaft, and which led it. And there's no question that caused tremendous damage. But it didn't end the program. It didn't obliterate the program. It didn't eliminate it all, which is now seen by the fact that Trump is after these 440 kilograms and hundreds, perhaps thousands of the advanced centrifuges that Iran stored in these deep underground facilities, maybe multiple facilities. No, the program is still there. And see, even if it was obliterated, you can't obliterate the knowledge of how to build this stuff. It's just a question of how long it takes you to get back. Is it 6 months? Is it 4 years? But you can build it back. We just saw Iran do it. The assured destruction of this equipment was achieved by negotiations. The 2014 Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that eliminated 2/3 of Iran's nuclear program. They had 19,000 centrifuges. They had to rip most of them out. They were only allowed to keep 5,000 of them. They had thousands of kilograms of gas stored. They had to get rid of it all. They were only allowed to keep 300 kilograms of low enriched gas, not the high enriched gas. I mean, that deal, eliminated their program much more than anything that that the bombing raids did. In fact, if that deal was still in existence, that Trump pulled out of it in 2018 and Iran started to rebuild. And that gives us a benchmark. How long did it take them to rebuild? Trump pulls out in 2018. The Iranians pull out. Rather, they start rebuilding around 2019. They wait a year, then they start rebuilding. And by now, before the June bombing, they had built 21, almost 22,000 centrifuges, and many of them advanced centrifuges, not the old models that they had before the deal, but newer generations that are much more efficient. In other words, can enrich uranium much more quickly than the old ones. And they had 8,000, almost 9,000 kilograms of stored gas, much more than they had before the Iran deal was established. So that gives you a benchmark of how quickly they can do it. I would guess that if the Iran war stopped right now, Iran could rebuild its facilities to the state they were in before last June's bombing in about 4 years.
If the 2018 withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal was a mistake, if we have information from Omani negotiators that Iran was really ready to accept the big concessions regarding their nuclear program, why did United States go to this war if we had been that close to reaching the deal?
Yeah. Excellent question. That is the question. Okay, so people talk now about Trump, looking for an exit ramp, how to get off of this, because I think even he understands that he's losing this war, that the strategic initiative has decidedly shifted to the Iranian side. They're setting the terms at this point. Well, he had 2 exit ramps. I mean, before the war began, he didn't take them. And the first one was the JCPOA, which was working. This was not a flawed deal. This prevented Iran from getting a weapon. As I say, those key limits would have been in effect until 2030. So Iran would not have a bomb, wouldn't be close to a bomb. And if it had still been in effect, we would have the chance to negotiate follow-on agreements. We'd have a chance to negotiate agreements that would address their ballistic missiles and other issues of concern. But he tore up that deal. He closed that exit ramp. But he had another exit ramp. And in the negotiations that were going on, and these were real negotiations with the United States and Iranian officials, moderated by the foreign minister of Oman in Geneva. On the Thursday before this war began, the Iranians tabled a proposal to get rid of the 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, the big card that they held. They offered to dilute it down and turn it into fuel rods, basically. And they offered to suspend uranium enrichment of any kind for 3 to 5 years. The British official who was there, a man named Jonathan Powell, who's the national security advisor to the prime minister in Britain, said, and he's quoted in The Guardian as saying this, that he was surprised at how good that deal was and that it wasn't their last offer. He thought the Iranians were willing to give more. The foreign minister of Oman was so impressed with this offer that he flew to Washington on the Friday before the bombing to brief personally Vice President J.D. Vance, because he didn't trust Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to report accurately what the Iranians were offering. And he was right. Witkoff did not understand what the Iranians were offering. This is the problem of having amateurs do your negotiations. There weren't any technical specialists in the room with them. Nobody interpreted this. Witkoff thought the Iranians were bragging about how much uranium they could have rather than saying we were willing to give this up. And he decided to go to war. Now, why? So part of this is ignorance and incompetence. Kushner and Witkoff simply not understanding the deal. Part of it was isolation. U.S. was doing this alone. Remember, when we did the JCPOA, we did it with this was a multinational deal. We did it with the United Kingdom, with France, with Germany, with the EU, with Russia, with China. I mean, this was a multinational deal that put Iran in a box. It's one of the reasons it was such a good deal. Iran was cornered. We had no allies with us, no one advising us on this. Well, I shouldn't say no one, because whispering in Trump's ear was Bibi Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, who promised Trump that they could do a quick decapitation strike. Israeli intelligence had been tracking the Israeli leadership for years. They knew that they were going to be at this meeting on the Saturday. They said, we can get them all, and we can win. And Mohammed bin Salman is reliably reported to have also been pushing Trump to do this. And this is part of the longstanding position of these two Iranian opponents who see Iran as a threat and have long held to the belief that what they call the bloody nose strategy. They would argue that Iran is somehow so powerful that it represents a global threat that must be eliminated, but so weak and so brittle that a sharp blow, a punch in the nose, a bloody nose, can cause the regime to collapse. And it appears that Trump bought into that. It appears that Netanyahu and MBS really thought that this was going to work. And Trump went for it. And he was so enamored with the success the U.S. military had in Venezuela, which was 200 commandos going in about 10 hours, kidnapping the president of Venezuela, Maduro, and bringing him to a holding cell in Bronx, in New York. And so he thought this was going to be like that. Well, when Plan A failed, he didn't have a Plan B. Now, Netanyahu does have a Plan B. And you can hear this in the way of supporters of Israel and the United States talk about the need to go on, and that is you need a sustained campaign. You need months of killings, assassinations, bombing to get not just the top leadership, but the leadership below that, the leadership below that, the leadership below that. You got to kill all the way down through the Revolutionary Guard leadership, through the leadership of the Basij, the militia, a million-man militia, and that's and destroy the infrastructure of the regime. And by infrastructure, they mean hospitals, water supplies, energy supplies, universities. You can see the kinds of things the Israelis are targeting right now. This is not missiles and nuclear and Navy. They're going after big core infrastructure that keeps the society functioning. They're trying to bring the whole society crashing down. That's the Israeli Plan B. It's unclear what Trump thinks at this point. Does he know this is going on? Does he approve of this? Does he really think some master stroke like seizing Karg Island or the shoreline of the Straits of Hormuz can get him out of this? I have no idea, because Trump is not only opaque on this, but he's incoherent. He'll say different things in the same 30-minute interview. This is the least democratic war the U.S. has ever waged. No consultations. Trump still hasn't spoken to the nation about why we're attacking Iran and what our aims are. It's mass confusion.
And that is worrying and worrisome for the rest of the world. We look at the United States as a very serious country. And I understand that there are some people, as you said, who might be incompetent in the administration, at least for this type of negotiations. I understand the pushes from Israel and from Saudi Arabia, but the United States has a robust and really serious intelligence community. Did they reach the president? Is he listening to them, what they are saying to him?
The available evidence indicates that the intelligence community is not playing a key role in advising the president at this point. And part of that is what Washington White House insiders are telling the press. And it's really frightening that the president can't focus on detailed briefings. He doesn't read memos. So his updates on the war, apparently, according to reliable reporting from multiple sources, often consist of a video showing the strikes that the U.S. is implementing on Iranian targets. Now, you have to understand, the United States has the most capable military force in the world. There's a saying that, if we can see it, we can kill it. Well, that's true. We are very sophisticated weapons. And so we are doing tremendous damage to a big part of Iran's military infrastructure. But tactical success doesn't translate into strategic victory. And so the president is seeing these images of us blowing things up. They're said to be the reels are said to be 1 to 2 minutes long, and he thinks great success. So that's what, one of the reasons he goes out and says we're winning the war isn't just that he's spinning it. He wants to keep everybody's spirits up. He wants to keep this stock market up. He wants to keep global panic from spreading and seizing the global economy. But he also seems to believe it. He thinks that these missile strikes show that we're seceding. It's the same mistake we made in the Vietnam War when I was a young student and an anti-war activist. In the Vietnam War, when we would listen to weekly body counts, and the officials would come on, generals would come on and tell us we were winning the war because look how many Viet Cong we were killing. It didn't, as one general after the Vietnam War, a major U.S. general was talking to General Thieu, who was the commander of the North Vietnamese forces. And the American general said, you never beat us on the battlefield. You didn't win a single battle. And General Thieu said, that may be true, but it's also irrelevant. And that's the case we have here. Absolutely, the Iranian regime cannot militarily defeat the United States, but it doesn't have to. It can economically defeat us, and that's what's going on now. They're outlasting us. They just have to survive in order to win this war, and that seems to be what they're doing.
We have a war. Nobody knows how it will end up. But regarding the Iranian nuclear program, what actually changed since the war began? Are they weaker, more determined, or less constrained?
I think one of the great lessons that other countries will draw from this war is that if you want to prevent the United States from attacking you, you better get a nuclear weapon. And a lot of my colleagues feel the same way. Nuclear policy experts, non-proliferation experts, that, look at the country. In Trump's first administration, in the first year of this term, he has attacked 8 different countries. From Nigeria to Somalia to strikes in Iraq and, of course, to Venezuela and now Iran. 8 different countries, roughly one every 6 weeks. And the thing that they all have in common is they don't have nuclear weapons. Who are the countries that he hasn't attacked? China, Russia, North Korea. What do they have in common? Nuclear weapons. And so a number of people believe that this war will actually spur proliferation. Countries considering starting their own programs. And that is almost certainly true in Iran. Because while we eliminated the top leadership of Iran, it's been replaced by what is widely considered to be a more hardline, more extremist set of leaders, including the Ayatollah Khamenei's son, who is considered more hardliner, and it's certainly consolidated the control of the Revolutionary Guards over the clerics. So the Revolutionary Guard seems to be firmly in control, and there are reliable reports, again, of the hardline factions in the Revolutionary Guard arguing that they should sprint to a bomb, that this is what they have to do now. Enough of this hedge strategy. I and many others have long believed that that's what Iran was doing, that they didn't have a dedicated nuclear weapons program. U.S. intelligence has long held, including reaffirming it in hearings just held a few weeks ago in Washington, that Iran used to have a nuclear weapons program, and they abandoned it in 2003 after our invasion of Iraq, and they never restarted it. So there is no dedicated program dedicated to building a nuclear weapon. What they have is a hedge strategy. They want to have the ability to build a nuclear weapon should they decide to do so sometime in the future. Now, that's dangerous, and obviously that's why we've negotiated with them, et cetera. But it wasn't a decision to go for a bomb. While we think that this war is probably tilted Iran's consideration now, and after this war, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Iran formally leave the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They were a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they pledged in that treaty never to acquire nuclear weapons, and their own policy has been, we will never have a nuclear weapon. They could leave. Any country can leave with a 6 months notice. There's no penalty for leaving. They just leave. And they could then take that 440 kilograms, put it in the centrifuges, build it into the material for a bomb, and construct a bomb, as we say, in under a year. And then you'd probably see Saudi Arabia duplicate that. Saudi Arabia is already negotiating with the United States to allow Saudi Arabia to build exactly the kind of enrichment facilities that we say Iran can't have. The UAE also would like, has nuclear designs of its own. So you could quickly see not just Iran, but a number of states in the region acquire nuclear weapons. And this has global consequences, coupled with countries like Japan and South Korea and even Taiwan losing faith in America's willingness to honor its security agreements to them, and concerned about China's rise. You might see those countries move towards building a nuclear weapon as well, something that is well within their technological capability. South Korea could build a weapon probably in under a year, Japan even quicker probably.
When President Trump gave this last ultimatum extension of 10 days, he told us that the Iranians are begging for the deal. And in the last flip-flop, it went back to the obliteration of everything in Iran, including the water desalination factories. In the meantime, USS Tripoli and USS Boxers are moving into the position. In your recent interview, you told CNN that ground seizure, for example, of Karg Island, would require literal bulldozers and excavation equipment under fire. Is the US military prepared or considering this as an option as we are approaching April 6?
The US military has long practiced what's called nuclear extraction missions, flying in special commandos who are trained and have specialists with them to seize nuclear materials under fire and extract them. What's worrying to me is when I saw that elements of the 2,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne were flown in, and are now believed to be in Kuwait, where they would stage any operation. That concerned me because that's the kind of thing you would need not just for Karg Island, but also for Isfahan or Natanz. But also, just over the last couple of days, we've seen that elements of Army Ranger battalions and Navy SEALs were flown in, and particularly the 75th Army Rangers, Well, that particular group of Rangers has trained with these nuclear extraction teams. And if you can just, Google 75th Army Rangers nuclear, and it'll come up immediately. And you can see the kind of things they conduct. And so, yes, the Army, U.S. Army has plans for everything. So somewhere there's a plan for this, and I would say a plan specifically for Natanz or Isfahan. The problem is it's really, really hard to do this, and let me just describe real quickly what would be involved and why most analysts think this is a suicide mission. You got the problem of transportation, excavation, identification, and then transportation back to consider. Transportation. These sites are deep in Iran's territory, closer to the center of Iran than the coast. So you got a long distance to go. It's sort of 600 miles, 1,000 miles you got to go. So you're not going to do that above ground. You got to fly them in. Okay, so now we're not talking about high altitude, fast moving jets. You're talking about helicopters and cargo planes, slow flying. Iran's got formidable air defenses. You just saw that they forced an F-35 2 weeks ago to make an emergency landing. That F-35 is now out of commission. They're capable of shooting these things down. We've had some close calls with some F-15s with Sidewinder missiles. These are the shoulder-fired, ground-fired, heat-seeking missiles that could hit planes. There's videos. So a cargo plane, man, that's a difficult part, right? With just getting there. Then you get there, well, where do you land? Well, there's no airfield there. You're gonna have to do a hard landing, and then you have to try to construct an airfield to bring the rest of the cargo in, because what you need is excavation material. These things are not just deeply underground. Satellite imagery has shown that Iran has covered the tunnel entrances with dirt, and in the case of Pickaxe Mountain, the site near Natanz, with concrete. So you're gonna have to remove that. Well, you can't do it with shovels. You're gonna have to bring in bulldozers, heavy digging equipment to dig it out. Fine. That's gonna take days, maybe weeks to do that, just to do the excavation. So say you do that and you get all that done. Then you get down to the site. Well, Iran's had months to prepare for your attempt. What's down there? We believe that this gas is stored in canisters that look a lot like scuba tanks. It would take maybe 60 to 100 of these tanks. Well, what if Iran has put out decoy tanks? What if there are hundreds of tanks and they all look alike? How do you pick out the right one? Once you do identify them and pick out the right one, you got to treat these things very carefully. If you puncture this, they release toxic gas, highly poisonous to anyone around. Also, you can't get these canisters too closely together. You can't just, jump them all together. No, because if you get them too close together, this is 60% enriched uranium. You could set off a nuclear chain reaction and have an explosion, not a full atomic bomb explosion, but still a nuclear explosion that would kill everybody in the area. To give you some idea of the difficulties of doing this, we have done an extraction mission of about 600 kilograms of highly enriched uranium in the early 1990s with Kazakhstan. We were concerned that Kazakhstan, after the fall of the Soviet Union, had this stockpile of uranium gas. It was lightly guarded. Terrorists might get it. We sent in a team of specially trained soldiers who trained for a month, and then went in there, and it took them a month on the ground in peace conditions with Kazakhstan cooperating to get all that uranium gas out of the tunnel that it was in Kazakhstan. That gives you some idea of how difficult the excavation and retraction are going to be. And then you got to fly everybody back. And remember, this is all being done deep inside Iran, so you're under fire. Troops are being attacked. I mean, there's going to be some heavy casualties in this mission. And for what? To do something you could have done at the negotiating table 5 weeks ago? To get rid of that 440 kilograms, you could have done it with a piece of paper, and now you're going to pay for it in blood? This is part of the incoherence of this strategy of this mission, and this is why the vast majority of American military experts who look at this think that this is just a cluster. It's a mess. It is a complete incoherent mess. I don't see any way the U.S. comes out of this war a winner.
Yes, and then there is a worry in the United States public about the casualties on the US side and what could happen to the boys who would potentially be engaged in that battle. So, if this is not about the bomb, is it about the regime change, or is this a day by day war where crucial decisions are made daily?
I would say it's day by day. I mean, you hear this a lot. I was talking to my friend Ed Luce about this, a reporter for the Financial Times. He called it, I was calling it a war of choice, and he said it was a war of whim. And I think he's more accurate. I mean, this is what it means to have an authoritarian leader. I mean, Donald Trump is an authoritarian leader. He hasn't consolidated an authoritarian regime, but he would like to. But he runs by fiat. He's surrounded not by experts, but by yes men and yes women who just tell him he's the greatest. You hear it all the time. Just watch a cabinet meeting or look at his press secretary. Look at the giant posters he's hanging of himself all around Washington, something no president has ever done. That looks a lot more like China and North Korea than it does like a democracy. So he's surrounded by these people who say he's infallible and he's great and he's winning, and I think he believes it. He's a megalomaniac. He thinks the world revolves around him and that he has unlimited power. He can do whatever he wants. And after all, he's never faced consequences for anything else he's done in his life. Why should he face consequences for this? No, I really honestly believe he's making it up as he goes along, and he's influenced, as people have long said, he's influenced by the last person he speaks to, not by some serious considered strategy. So just to be clear about this, do not believe that Trump is keeping everybody off guard, is keeping everybody guessing. Oh, everything's going great. We'll get the negotiations are going on versus, and then the next day he tells you we're going to obliterate their entire power structure, which, by the way, is a war crime. Intentionally hitting civilian targets like energy infrastructure is a war crime, but he just says it. Don't think that's some elaborate plan. No, that's how mercurial he is. There is no grand strategy. There is no grand plan. I think he's desperate. I think he wants to end this war. I think he's looking for a way out, but he can't. There is no winning way out. There's no way to leave this war a victor, and that's what's preventing him from leaving, which is why I believe he's going to escalate. He's going to escalate. He doesn't want to be seen as a loser. So, however desperate that escalation will be, however low the probability of success, I think he's going to try it. And I'm telling there is I can't tell you how pessimistic national security experts are in this country over the prospects for this war and how powerless we all feel to do anything about it, because this is not being waged by a democracy. This is being waged by an authoritarian leader, and public opinion simply doesn't matter to him.
If the result of this war is that Iran, as you mentioned, leaves NPT and expels inspectors and goes fully underground, who exactly can still claim this was a success?
Well, like all authoritarian leaders, you can claim success. I mean, Putin could leave Ukraine tomorrow and he would spin it as a success, and he has an elaborate propaganda apparatus that would play that story out. The president has formidable media abilities. He has the Fox network that's basically state media. He would put this myth out firmly, and his and I'm gonna talk about the splits in MAGA in just a second, but he could claim a military success, because when you look at the Department of Defense's objectives, DoD has been much more careful than the president, much more precise than the president in what they said. They quickly came out and said their objectives are to uh, degrade, not eliminate, degrade Iran's nuclear program, degrade its missile program, degrade its navy, and they've done that. I mean, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said that we had knocked out 90% of Iran's missile. We now know that's not true. Reliable estimates have now come out that U.S. intelligence believe we've knocked out only 30% of it, a third. a third of the missile. They have high confidence we've hit a third, and low confidence of another third. But that's nowhere near 90%. So we've hit a lot of it, and you could claim, okay, that's it. We've degraded, and you could fall back on the old Israeli strategy of mowing the grass. I mean, Israel has a strategy now which is pretty clear. Some people call it the Sparta strategy, that you have to think of Israel as fighting the rest of the world, fighting alone, maybe with the US, maybe by yourself, forever. That you live in a world of war, and you have to have a nation of warriors, and this is what you do. And clearly, Israel's got an extremely capable military and is capable of going in to Gaza and decimating Gaza, and then Hezbollah, and now Iran, and if they rebuild, going in and do it again. The mowing the grass strategy. So you could have a U.S. strategy, and Trump talks about this every once in a while, where we degraded, and if they rebuild, we'll go back and degrade again. I think that's a loser strategy. I don't think that's sustainable, but that is their point of view, and you could claim that. And you could even, he's claiming we're in negotiations that Iran has agreed right now. Yesterday, he said Iran has agreed to most of our 15-point demands. That is absolute nonsense. That is absurd. There's no way Iran has agreed to that. But he says it, and then it gets presented, and not just by the state media, Fox News or the MAGA network, but by the New York Times. And so, as Abraham Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all of the time. Yes. Yes. And you can fool all the people some of the time. So that's what Trump is relying on. Here's his problem, though, is that his MAGA base, his biggest megaphone, the thing that amplifies that supports him, is splitting viciously over this war. But you see it in form MAGA supporters coming to the No Kings rallies this Saturday and interviewing with people. I just saw an unbelievable interview with one MAGA supporter, how disillusioned they were with Trump. He was supposed to lower prices, release the Epstein files, and keep us out of war. Prices have gone up. He hasn't released the files, and we're now in a major war in Asia. What? This is not what people voted for, and you see it in columnists, whether it's Tucker Carlson or, podcasters like Tucker Carlson or Megyn Kelly, blasting the war, blasting the MAGA supporters who are still with the president. And so this split has developed, and if anything is going to convince Trump to leave, even if he's losing, it'll be concern that his base is cracking. It's not that he's down to 36% support, which is the lowest approval rating of any U.S. president in history, but it's that his core support started to crack, and that political reality may cause him to make a strategic decision, and perhaps in the next couple of weeks.
You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation use of the tactical nuclear weapon in Iran. The same tactical nuclear weapon is in Russia possession. So if the United States use it in Iran, who is going to stop Russia to use it in Ukraine?
Well, that's exactly right. When I wrote about this at the beginning of the war, I didn't think Putin was bluffing. I thought this was an existential war for Putin. And I thought that if he started losing on the battlefield, he would use a tactical nuclear weapon. And we have long discussed this, and the Russian nuclear policy discussions have outlined various scenarios for this. I won't go into the details, but this, basically, he could he could use a nuclear weapon on a battlefield target in Ukraine, a small one. He could use it as a demonstration shot. Fire it over the Black Sea, just as a signal of intent. And in Russian strategy, there's actually a strategy called escalate to de-escalate, meaning that Russia would consider using a nuclear weapon first as a demonstration of how serious this was, and to cause the adversary, NATO, to back off, lest a conventional war turn into a nuclear war. So all that was completely realistic, and there was no way to stop Putin from doing it. There was nothing internally that was going to stop him. That's why you saw Joe Biden so cautious about the kinds of aid we gave Ukraine, the limits on the range of the weapons we gave them, much too cautious in my view. He held on to that belief much too long. He should have done more. So it's the same is true for the United States. And it's not just authoritarian leaders who have this power. All the nuclear armed states have some degree of sole authority, that the authority is under the president alone or the prime minister alone can make this. In some cases, there's contingencies for consultation, but they're not required. Like in America, the president doesn't have to consult with anybody. In Russia, there's technically he has to consult with the head of the general staff and the minister of defense, but it's not clear that he really has to do that because, after all, he's Putin. So no, this issue of who controls the button is one that should trouble all of us on all our countries, particularly as we're entering this world. If you don't mind me just taking a diversion here. For me, the single most important development of this century on nuclear policy isn't new technologies. It's not AI. It's not China increasing its nuclear force. It's not more countries talking about getting nuclear weapons. Those kinds of issues have been with us for the 80 years of the nuclear world, of the nuclear age. What's different now is that for the first time in human history, the vast majority of nuclear weapons are controlled by authoritarian leaders. We've never had a situation like this. We've gotten used to authoritarian regimes acquiring nuclear weapons, but now we have nuclear-armed states acquiring authoritarian regimes. Here's what I mean. At the beginning of this century, only one nuclear-armed state was authoritarian, and it was China. Russia was still a fledgling democracy trying to make a transition from the communist era. North Korea hadn't acquired a nuclear weapon yet. But now we have Russia, China, North Korea, clearly authoritarian regimes, but also authoritarian leaders in India, Pakistan, Israel, and the United States. Different regimes, not consolidated by any means, but all led by authoritarian leaders who want to build an authoritarian regime. That they represent 96% of nuclear weapons in the world. Only the United Kingdom and France are liberal democracies still with nuclear weapons, and who knows how long they will stay democracies. So this problem of nuclear weapons in the authoritarian age is the big issue we have to come to grips with. It's no longer democracies controlling most of these weapons with moral restraints, with domestic political restraints, with some sense of accountability of the leaders to the public. No, we're as Ruth Bain. I'm sorry. Let me put in as many students of the authoritarianism have said. We live in the age of strong men, and I should just amend that to say we live in the age of nuclear strongmen.
And I think this is so important point for people to hear and to understand, because if you don't have a democratically elected leadership who is controlling the nuclear weapon, then the usage of the nuclear weapon depends solely on the decision of one person. Am I right about this?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Donald Trump, during the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon was very frustrated that Congress was trying to impeach him. And he said, look, he says, I can get up, walk into my office, pick up the phone, and in 30 minutes, 20 million people will be dead. And he was right. He could do it then, and the president can do it now. The president of the United States and the leaders of most of the nuclear-armed states have the sole unfettered authority to launch a nuclear weapon whenever they want, for whatever reason they want, and no one can stop them. If we get out of this mess, if there's a new president in 2029, we've got to fix that. We can't allow, at least in the United States, we can't allow that process to continue, because Trump is not going to be the only authoritarian wannabe president. There are going to be others.
So if Iran doesn't surrender to the 15-point demand list, if it doesn't overthrow its own regime, if it doesn't stop supporting Hezbollah and Houthis, then what?
What's on the other side of this mess? Well, I think this is the nightmare scenario. Okay. And this is the likely scenario. I don't see any reason why they should give in. I think they can wait us out like the Vietnamese did. I mean, it's for another, or the Afghanis did. I mean, we were 20 years of war and we left Afghanistan ruled by the same people we had tried to overthrow. I mean, it wasn't a fair contest, right? U.S. military against a bunch of Taliban? Come on. Couldn't beat them. So Iran is no Taliban. They're stronger. They have all the cards right now. So the likely scenario is the U.S. slinks away in retreat. And what you have is a weakened Iran militarily, but an embittered Iran with a more hardline leadership, now with a powerful economic weapon that they have demonstrated for the first. There have been closures of the Straits of Hormuz before, but they've been brief. The tanker wars, for example, of the last century. There have been threats to do this, but now they've done it. And they basically turned the Straits of Hormuz into a toll road. Well, they will let friendly countries get their tankers by for a fee. By the way, Iran is making more from oil revenues now than it did before the war, right? So we're helping them finance their own war against us. So that's a huge card. And on the other side of the Persian Gulf, or what they call the Arabian Gulf, you have the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, etc., UAE, all weakened. Not weakened militarily, really, but weakened economically, weakened politically, weakened strategically, because their whole economic model was to build this island of peace and prosperity where you could come and invest and make a lot of money. And, we're developing future cities. You've been to Dubai. I mean, you go to it's the future. It's unbelievable. It's beautiful. And they were pitching this as a place where you could build data centers, for example. You're having trouble building a data center in Virginia or Ohio or Pennsylvania, come here. And Amazon built a big data center in Qatar. Iran hit it with one Shahed drone. Oh, well, now how does that data center look? You're not going to get hit with a drone in Virginia, you know? So now you have serious questions. Their whole model is shaken, which is why you hear Saudi Arabia and UAE said, and I spoke to a senior UAE official just last week about this. He says, look, we can disagree about why we got into this, but now that we're in it, we have to finish it properly. And by finish it properly, they mean that Iran can't be allowed to have that missile capability that could threaten them, and it can't be allowed to close the Straits of Hormuz ever again. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, there is no way to do that. So you realize that the strategic objectives that these states want are reasonable, but they're not going to meet them either. So who's the losers here? Well, the losers are not just the United States, but it's going to be the Arab Gulf states who are going to be weakened, not because Iran can invade them, but because Iran has demonstrated it has the capability to threaten them seriously where it hurts the most. And finally, the other big loser is going to be Israel. Even before this war, the American public opinion of Israel changed dramatically from before the Gaza war. And polls consistently show that more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians now than with Israelis. That has never been true. It's true now. Israel has become poison for Democratic politicians. You look at some of the leading figures who are running for president in America, and they are distancing themselves from Israel. They are saying things like Israel can no longer get a free ride. We'll be willing to, like Rahm Emanuel, a strong Israeli supporter, said in a recent interview with J Street, with Jeremy Ben-Ami and Milan Goldenberg. He said, we can sell military weapons to Israel, but just like we sell it to everybody else, no more subsidies. no more free ride. And approval of their policies in the West Bank or in Gaza, no Democratic politician, I'm sorry, no nationally elected Democratic politician is going to approve of that. You see senators breaking with Israel repeated. So the U.S.-Israeli relationship is turned towards distance from Israel. And I'm not Jewish myself, but my family's Jewish, and I could tell you my kids do not care about Israel. And this is a generational change. Where they don't identify with Israel, they don't think about Israel. They've all been there. They took birthright trips. So I have family in Israel, but this is not the Israel we grew up with. This is a whole different state with a whole different ideology, and an ideology and a worldview and a strategic view that we don't agree with. So Israel is the big loser. The Arab Gulf states are the big loser. America's the big loser. The winners are China, Russia, which is its oil revenues have gone through the roof because of this war. It's helping Putin out of a very bad situation he was in with major government deficits because of his now 5-year war with Ukraine. And Iran is probably it's going to be a winner, a battered winner, but a winner. And so we're going to leave a situation much worse off than when we found it. Instead of having a quick fix, we have a long-term developing disaster that we're going to leave behind.
You mentioned Russia and China, which were notably very quiet all this time. Watching from aside, what is going to be their conclusion after this war? What they are going to do after this war?
Well, for China, it consolidates China's view that it's the rising power. And part of the reason it's the rising power, it's not just what they're doing, which is filled with its own contradictions, but the U.S. is committing national suicide. We're killing ourselves. I mean, almost if Donald Trump was a paid Russian agent, he couldn't do a better job of destroying American credibility and influence in the world. I mean, he's taken down some of our major global advantages, our aid. Countries don't have to agree with the United States. We're giving them major aid for their programs. They got to be nice to us. And he just dismantled it in the first couple of months. It was incredibly stupid. Our propaganda arms, Voice of America. I mean, people all around the world relied on radio broadcasts and TV. Got rid of it. I mean, just real instruments of power. Our alliance system. What distinguishes the United States from Russia and China? Our global alliance system. China doesn't have an alliance system. Russia's got Belarus. I mean, and he's dismantling it. He's treating our allies like enemies, like trade rivals, like people who have property he desires, like Greenland, or maybe it's the Panama Canal, or maybe it's Gaza. It's an insane view of the world. So he's destroying. So China their conclusion is the United States is in an extended period of decline, which is probably true. Not reversible anytime in the near future, and they're on an inevitable rise, which is probably true. Russia's got a respite. Russia's not on the rise, but it's helping to consolidate its influence. And as long as and Putin's grip looks firm, and its threat to Eastern Europe is stronger now than before Trump and before the war. And of course, what the middle countries think. I mean, you saw the Davos speeches and the brilliant speech by Prime Minister Carney talking about how the middle powers have to rally themselves. And I think that's the wave of the future, that the Europeans have to finally realize the power of their own political, diplomatic, and potentially military might that they can exercise to preserve their own freedoms, their own bravery, but also to become now the leaders of the free world. The U.S. leadership of the free world is over. Even if a Democrat is elected in 2029, it's not in 2028. Who's going to take us back? Who's going to believe that we're back? Who's going to believe a U.S. commitment? I mean, they've just seen that twice in this century, the U.S. has flip-flopped between strategic directions. What is there another country in the world that has done that? So no, I believe Trump's 2 terms, plus the mistakes that our leaders have made in other areas under Democrats and Republicans have led to the inevitable decline of U.S. influence in the world and the inevitable. But I don't think it necessarily going to be replaced by China. I think it depends what the middle powers do, what Europe does, what East Asia does, how they handle it. But it's no longer a world that's where the frameworks are being set by the United States. That world is over.
Mr. Cirincione, before we finish, we have something that we called 5 short questions for 5 short answers. So the first one is Iran closer to a bomb today than before the war?
Closer to a bomb because it's primarily been a question of intent rather than capability. They've had the capability to build a bomb for many, many years. I think their intent has now changed. So they are closer to a bomb.
Is this still a non-proliferation war or not?
It was never a non-proliferation war. I mean, I don't know what this was about, but stopping Iran from getting the bomb was just an excuse. The same way Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush told us that Saddam was, steps away from a nuclear weapon. It was a lie in 2003. It's a lie in 2026. The nuclear threat is used as a justification for imminent threat, for the use of military force. And we didn't have time for negotiations. Negotiations wouldn't work. It was a cover for conducting a war he wanted to conduct for other reasons.
So let's say like this, Khamenei was replaced by Khamenei. Power in Iran is now arguably in the hands more or less of Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So I'm not sure can we consider this as a regime change, but if real regime change comes, can it stop nuclear programs or accelerate them?
You're right. The regime has changed, but not the way Donald Trump claims. We don't have a more reasonable Iranian leadership. It's not a reformist Iranian leadership. It's a more hardline leadership, more inclined towards 3 things. One is an autocracy, an autarkic system. Many of the hardliners have long believed that Iran should be able to have an economy that depends on itself and not on trade with the West. I think that view is probably strengthened. And one that also looks east rather than west, so relies on Russia and China rather than on European relations. And one that is more committed to seeking a nuclear weapon than any previous Iranian regime. It's a regime change for the worst.
Is there still off-ramp for this war?
The off-ramp is U.S. retreat. There's no. I should say it's not impossible that there could be some kind of fig leaf of an agreement, but it's not going to be on U.S. terms. There's no way Iran's going to agree to any of those demands that the U.S. has made. Give up its missile capability, no enrichment. I mean, forget it. None of that's going to happen. There could be some fig leaf of an agreement. I'd say it's more likely we'd get an agreement for a ceasefire. But I'm not even sure we can get that. I mean, why would the Iranians agree to stop firing? No, I think this war is going to be over when Iran decides it's over.
And lastly, are we safer today than we were 3 weeks ago?
Oh, no. It's a much more dangerous region and a much more dangerous world. Iran's hand has been strengthened. America's influence has been weakened. Our military capability is impressive, but our strategic vision is highly questionable. I think more and more countries are going to distance themselves from the United States. That makes America weaker, and I think that weakens global security because in many ways it opens the door to increased Russian and Chinese influence. No, so this war is is going to go down as a great strategic defeat for the United States. Probably the person in America who's most happy about this war is George W. Bush, because he no longer is the president who committed the single worst strategic blunder in American history. That honor now goes to Donald Trump.
Mr. Cirincione, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for talking to Frontlines and Backrooms.
I'd like to say it was my pleasure, but let me just say it was great talking with you. Thank you very much for having me on.
In the next episode, we speak with Professor Una Hathaway about what happens when the rules no longer hold and what that means for the future of international law. If you value long-form conversation that go beyond headlines and sound bites, consider to subscribe to support this project. It is because of the listeners like you that we are able to continue this backroom dialogue independent and in-depth. You can find a link to join in the show description. This was Frontlines and Backrooms. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep looking beyond the noise.